Hello, all, and welcome to the Brave Sound Podcast, the show where we uncover the stories, processes, and worldviews behind the most creative and artful musicians. We are delighted to have on the show today Dr. Charles McPherson, an incredible musician, alto saxophonist, composer, educator, and master of the bebop language we in the jazz community cherish very much. Born in Joplin, Missouri, McPherson moved to Detroit at age 9, where he met Barry Harris, who became a mentor, as well as a multitude of other phenomenal musicians that were on the Detroit scene at that time. After moving to New York in 1959, McPherson became a sideman with Charles Mingus for 12 years. He recorded his own projects as a leader, in addition to being featured on other artists' records, including Barry Harris, Art Farmer, Kenny Drew, Toshiko Akiyoshi, the Carnegie Hall Jazz Orchestra, the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra with Wynton Marsalis. He has performed on over 70 records to date. Dr. McPherson was also the featured alto saxophonist in the Clint Eastwood film Bird, a biopic about Charlie Parker. In addition, Dr. McPherson is also the resident composer for the San Diego Ballet, where he has written 3 original suites for chamber music and jazz combos. These can be found on his latest record, Jazz Dance Suites, which we will discuss in just a moment. Throughout his 6 decades of being an integral performer of the music, McPherson has not merely remained true to his bebop origins, but has expanded on them. His latest project, entitled Jazz Dance Suites, is a compilation of several suites he composed while in collaboration with the San Diego Ballet. McPherson's daughter, Camille, is a soloist in her 9th season with the prestigious dance company and was a direct inspiration for the making of this record. It's available on Bandcamp, and it's a beautiful listen, and I highly recommend for you guys to go check it out. So, without further ado, welcome Dr. Charles McPherson to the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
So, I'd first love, by the way, I checked out your record, and it's awesome. The musicians on it are phenomenal, and so are the compositions, and I love the whole message behind it, and also the idea of combining 2 different art forms is something that speaks to me a lot. I always have an inspiration, or get inspired by people that do that kind of stuff. So, I'd really love to hear your inspiration source to the first suite on the record Song of Songs. So I was doing some research and I found out it's a passage in the First Testament. So I'm just curious to know the meaning that the First Testament had to you, this section of it, and what inspired you to write music for it.
Well, the choreographer, Javier Velasco, it was his idea to do this. And he asked me, would I be interested in writing some original compositions for the story. So you're right, the story is in the Old Testament, and it's loosely King Solomon and a young lady that he's in love with, and she's in love with him. So the story is about unrequited love. This love is not consummated, and so there's a lot of heartbreak there, but wishful thinking on both of, from King Solomon and also the young lady he's in love with. So the story is that, essentially, and it's a complicated story, actually. When you read it, it's not linear as we think of the unfolding of stories. It's a lot of metaphor, a lot of it is dreamlike. So it's a difficult text, but I would say it's about unrequited love. And so I agreed to do this, and I just wrote compositions that I thought addressed all of the different emotionalities that these 2 people felt, especially from the young woman's point of view. Because when you read the story, it's more of her saying how she feels and what she wants. And so it's really from her point of view. And so there are some joyful moments because she does feel joy sometimes. There's a tune called Love Dance and the Wedding Song, I would say, are pretty joyful and happy and uplifting, especially the wedding dance. And but there are a lot of compositions that are dark and kind of sad and that really reflect, unsatisfied love and yearnings.
Well, I definitely think that suite encompassed a really wide range of emotions super well. And I was actually watching an interview that you did on YouTube. I wrote down who you did the interview. It was with Ed Joffe.
Ed Jaffe, yes.
Ed Jaffe, yes. And one point, you spoke in the beginning of the interview a lot about your upbringing and how one of your first mentors, Barry Harris, informed you that he told you it's important to be informed other than just to play your instrument.
Exactly.
So is the First Testament, was that a text that you were familiar with before you spoke to the choreographer at all, or?
Yes,
what?
I was familiar to a point. I had read that. And but after being approached, I read it and reread it and looked up online things too, because this, as I said earlier, it's a complicated text actually.
Yeah.
And so I just went online to see what other people that have studied this text and what are they getting from it, and how are they viewing the story, And even there was not much. I mean, a lot of people differed, and these are experts as to what the story is really about. So it's pretty tricky. So I just dealt with the emotional part, and especially what this young woman was feeling, and just approached it from that angle, and tried to be varied and make sure I show a menu or a variety of emotionalities, even though it's about unrequited love, which is pretty sad. But I had to. There were some, as I said before, joyful moments, and also pensive moments, thoughtful moments. So I try to use all of the emotions that humans feel, that we feel as human beings. And of course there's joy, and of course there's sadness, but there's also mystery, there's also thoughtfulness, there's also eros, which is like love for someone. But there's also what you would call agape, which is not love or sexual love, but love, reverence, like love you would have for God, or love you would have for your parents, or your brother or your sister, and of course God, our higher being, and reverence. So we as people are capable of feeling many things, and so I just try to get concerning that story, that particular suite. The overriding emotions were thoughtfulness, a little bit of mystery, sadness, and some joy as well. And I just approached it like that.
Wow. Well, I'd really love to talk to someone with 6 decades, like I said before, of composition experience and performing. I know Austin and we both go to school for music performance, and something that is emphasized in our program, especially with Stefan Harris, he was the chair of the program, and his big concept was really noting down what chords specifically entail or what emotion or what chords will create certain emotions within people. And although people at first would think, oh, it's all subjective, when the whole room is listening to a certain chord, for example, like a dominant 13 flat 9 chord, there was such a specific feeling that everyone felt. And like, for example, like for that chord feeling, like we would identify that as a baby, like holding a baby. So it like that chord brought out such like a cherishing type of feeling within the majority of the room. So with writing this suite and you wanting to convey all these emotions, what techniques would you use, or how would you go about trying to convey mystery or eros or sensual love, all these emotions? How would you go about describing them in music?
Well, it's your teacher was spot on. I think certain chords definitely have an emotional resonance with people, and most people. This might be across the human spectrum, and so you just have to be in like you play certain chords. Let's say a half diminished, for instance, minor seventh with a flatted 5.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would think most people, most cultures, would think of that as a dark, a little bit of, let's say, just a darkness about it, or thoughtful maybe, but not. You wouldn't think of it as a joyous, clap hands, let the good times roll, like you would say a big major 7th or a major 6th chord.
Yeah.
A major 6th chord is a happy. It's like flowing water. It's a happy. It's like the sun is shining and it's everything. Oh, it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of feel. Diminished chords are interesting. They can be dark too, but you get a good idea of this by listening to great, really good screenwriters that write for movies. And I mean especially the older movies like the 1940s. There was an influx of composers that moved from Eastern Europe, Russia, and settled in the United States. There was quite a few of them, and they settled in Hollywood. And quite often, when you look at the film noir, movies of the 40s and detective movies and just great classic movies of that era, the writers, the people who are writing the scores, are these well-trained, great musicians and extremely knowledgeable in what we would call modern harmony. They're totally into Stravinsky and Hindemith and Bartok and all of the modern harmonies, if you will, and the 12 tone, Schillinger, Schoenberg, the whole bit. These people were very much into that, and so when they wrote, chords and sounds that would go with the emotionality that the actors were conveying at a moment in time, then they really knew how to do that. And then if you as a musician and a composer, you are very much aware that these people really know how to do that. And this is when you become aware of the, the universality of certain chords that produce the same emotion in most people. When something on the screen is getting ready to happen and it's going to be, there's a suspense involved. and the audience knows at any moment something is going to happen, and let's say negative, for a negative something. Well, there are certain chords that produce the emotional tension for that moment, and it's not going to be a big fat major seventh chord. So this is when you get in touch with, certain chords produce certain feelings in people, and then you must be aware of that yourself, and you must be very aware of all of the emotions that all the chords produce. So you named what, a dominant seventh with a flatted nine? Is that?
I said dominant 7, 13, flat 9.
Okay, flatted 9 and the 13. Okay, so that's a very nice chord. But if you didn't have the 13th there and you just had the flatted 9, that would be just kind of what you would call tense and dissonant.
Mm-hmm.
The 13 is actually giving it a certain brightness, or almost hopeful, and it's making, like, the little baby that you want to rock, that's making that work better. If you took the 13th out of that and just make it a dominant seventh with a flatted 9, or say a raised 9, you wouldn't think about a little baby and rocking the little baby to pacify it. So that one note can make a difference. And not only that, that dominant seventh with the flatted 9 in it, it's the difference between what note is on top. That same chord, if you have the flatted 9 above the 13th, have the 13th under the flatted 9, then that's even a brighter sound and more hopeful. So it's a lot involved. It's not only the chord itself, it's where are you putting the alternate, or where you're putting the things that make the chord what it is.
Wow, yeah.
And it's also, what do they precede, and where they're going to. All that can actually color. If you take a diminished chord by itself, it can be kind of dark. But if you're going to a certain spot, that diminished might not be that dark, So it's depending on where you're going. But the chords unto themselves definitely have a certain emotional resonance, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
We know that a major chord is bright and hopeful and happy. A minor chord is the element of sadness, just because of that minor third.
Mm-hmm.
So and as a writer, you got to, I think, so that you will write, because to me, writing music is not just an exercise of just putting something down on a piece of paper. You can do that and practice that way, but when you have a specific target and goal in mind, I think that's very helpful. It keeps us from rambling.
Yeah.
I think it's something interesting about being episodic, in how things unfold, and to be into like a composition is to convey what emotionality or what body of emotions, and just to be aware of that rather than. And see, this is the difference between art and craft. Being able to write and put it on paper requires craft, the craft of writing, knowing how to do it. But choosing the best notes, the best chords, the best phrasing, the best rhythmic, and how all that unfolds, that's the art of it. And having the craft to bring that about is the only reason why craft has importance, is to facilitate the artistry and not the other way around.
Do you want to say something?
Yes. A lot of beautiful thoughts there, and we covered so much ground, from the voicing of a chord to the difference between art and craft, and just so many questions came to mind. So maybe I'll ask a few that you can answer, maybe in short answer. First, you were talking about film noir. and the way those composers studied great harmonists and how they conveyed emotion with sound. Do you have a favorite movie soundtrack or favorites that you'd like to share?
Well, okay. Now I'm not going to be so good at it, but there are some. There's a movie called Green Dolphin Street.
Oh.
Okay, now that, Miles Davis recorded that. It's a beautiful tune. And do you know the name of the composer? It was Branslow Capers.
Ashamed to say I don't know.
I'm not doing a good job of pronouncing his name. But he wrote Green Dolphin Street, and Miles recorded it, and it was very popular. But that was from a movie in the 40s. That score was a score called Green Dolphin. The name of the movie was Green Dolphin Street.
Wow.
And so he wrote it. Some of the movies, there's a writer called Dashiell Hammett, and also an American writer named Raymond Chandler. These people were writing some of the detective stories like Sam Spade, and there are movies with Humphrey Bogart being Sam Spade or something, and some of these movies are with these great, I would say all of those movies have those composers that I'm talking about. Also, a film called Laura, which the tune Laura, the standard, the name of the movie was Laura, and this was, film noir as well during the 40s. And the tune Laura was played all through this tune. Now, I think that composer was an American composer, David Raskin. But for me, a lot of the movies in the 40s and especially the film noir had these great composers, that had migrated and wrote these beautiful scores. It's almost any of those movies you could listen, and they don't have to be like classic movies necessarily. But if you, as a composer and musician, and you listen to some of the harmonies, right away you realize that, oh, this is very interesting, whoever this writer is.
Just a side note, I feel musicals around that time period, also, I think in the musical theater world, they call that time period the 40s and 50s, like the golden era of musical theater creation, with guys, and so many jazz standards came out of that time period as well, from Jerome Kern, Frank Lesser, so it's they kind of go hand in hand in some way, just like with having music be in the storyline with characters and a plot.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, the composers that were writing during this era were people like George Gershwin,
Yeah.
Harold Arlen, Jerome Kern. These kind of people were writing. These people could really write, Vernon Duke. Vernon Duke wrote April in Paris, Autumn in New York, Taking a Chance on Love, Cabin in the Sky, a lot of great music. If you listen to a tune like Autumn in New York, it's absolutely gorgeous. Not only melodically, but the harmony and the chord changes are so intelligent, so sensible, and yet and still emotionally satisfying, and really tell the story of autumn in New York. Those are great composers. These people are real. George Gershwin was a great musician. When jazz musicians play compositions by George Gershwin, they don't have to alter much or change much because it's there. The same thing with Vernon Duke, the same thing with Harold Arlen. There are some composers that you do have to, if it weren't for jazz musicians and jazz singers and people who really knew how to sing and phrase, some tunes would be corny, actually. But there are composers that you don't have to do much to harmonically because they know when the 9 should be flatted and where to raise the 13, and all of this. And they're doing that and it's very intelligent. And also the lyrics are the poetry are extremely smart and intelligent and well written. They're written for young adults, basically, as opposed to tunes that are written for people 14 or 15 years old. See, that changed too in the years. Years ago, because older people bought the records years ago. As of late, the people who buy the records are, now that's even an old-fashioned statement, buying a record. But it's the 14, 15-year-old people that were making the record industry rich, because they go out and browse and buy records. They spend money. But the older people don't do that as much anymore. Well, when you go back farther in time, it wasn't the 14 or 15-year-old person that's spending a lot of money. It would be people 21, 22, 23, who were spending money and buying records and that kind of thing. So it changed, certain things changed. And also, when that changed, tunes were written for people 14 or 15 years old. So the lyrics are basically expressing the love desires of somebody 15. Well, that's good. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but there's a lot of difference between somebody 15 being in love and somebody 25 being in love. There's a difference. And the lyrics support more of an adult person. See what I mean? And that has, all those tunes that we're talking about were written for really a younger adult, So when you listen to the lyrics of All the Things You Are, it's not for some kid 14. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And the lyrics reflect that. Aside from that, the composers, as we've talked about, were great and very good musicians. And this is why jazz musicians played those standards. It was always part of the repertoire. So for musicians, even the farther back you go, and even today, the menu of a good musician, a jazz musician, would to have plenty of original music that belonged to them, but also the American Songbook that they would mix with their own originals and the American Songbook, and maybe other tunes that other jazz musicians wrote. Mm. But they were always included, Mm. And the reason is because they're great tunes. They're well written, and they're sensible and logical.
Can I ask you? You definitely spoke a lot about just the brilliance and the importance of the Great American Songbook, of which I'm a big fan, and I've studied quite a bit. But I sense amongst my peers and people our age a growing disenchantment with going back and learning these songs. They don't feel the same connection to this music as people, older people who have grown up with this music, or saw those films when they were in high school, and had that type of relationship with the popular music of the day. Mm-hmm. What would you say there can be jazz in the same spirit of jazz? What would jazz be without the Great American Songbook? Because it seems to me that's the direction where a lot of younger players are trying to push.
Well, I guess it would be different, and the reason why, there's a reason why, and it's not just because younger players are not playing those tunes anymore. It's got something to do with melodicism and the power of the melodic, the power of melodicism. And a lot of times when you hear, well, let me say this, for sure there are a lot of young players where the American Songbook doesn't resonate with them at all. They have no interest in it. But I must say that all young players don't think that way. And from what I've heard, and I've heard a lot of young players because I do clinics, especially before the pandemic, all over the world, Europe, England, all over the United States. I've heard a lot of young players, and believe you me, the most talented of them, the most smartest of them, and the best players of them actually do know the value of the American Songbook and do know how to use that information. The best of them. And when I say that, I mean the most complete of them. And when I say complete, music is multidimensional. It has a lot of different sides and facets. And when I say complete, I mean the jazz player who is extreme, it's got the gift of melodicism, meaning the ability to choose the best note for the moment all of the time, and the best rhythmic phrasing, and the most interesting harmony, and this, what would you call, stream of consciousness, creativeness, not playing licks, but play with the right emotion that is able to express all of the different human emotions, not sound like some computer or some machine, but actually sound like a human being that can think and has feeling. The players, young players, to me, that there are some that have all that, and they are the most complete because they have all the good stuff from the older stuff. They have their own present creative input, and they mix it, and they don't leave anything behind. They just add to whatever they are. And then to me, they're the best player, the most complete. And so the American Songbook, there's a lot of value in it. And if the player does not have the intelligence to understand that, then so be it. Because there's value there. And the value there is the logic, the linear melodic logic that's being used for most of those songs, especially by people like Duke Ellington and George Gershwin and Vernon Duke and people who write music like that. And also standards allow you to alter the note, reroute the harmony. It allows you to do that. So there's something very artful about taking, say, a tune, a simple tune like, I don't care, April in Paris, for instance, and then reroute and doing alternate changes and altering the harmony throughout the tune. I mean, that's beautiful to do that. And those tunes allow you to do it, to take a tune and just alter the heck out of it and put your harmonic creativity on that. That is beautiful to me. So there are some players that think that the harmonic minor scale has no use anymore. You know, I mean, I've actually had teachers actually say, well, you know, we don't play the harmonic minor scale is not, we don't play that anymore. It's just a Dorian minor and, you know, or something that we don't play that anymore. And to me, the concept of taking a scale and putting value, more value, less value, is pretty much like saying a verb has more value or less value than an adjective. That's actually really stupid. So to write a story or to write a sentence, you need nouns, verbs, prepositional phrases, adjective phrases, adverbs. You need all of the parts of speech and grammar to write a sentence. You need a bunch of sentences to write a paragraph. You need a bunch of paragraphs to write a short story. You need a lot of stuff going on for a novel. So putting more importance on parts of speech is ridiculous. It's what you say and how you tell the story that's important. Not the fact you used a noun or a verb here and there. It's how are you using the nouns and the verbs. So for some musician to say a harmonic minor has more importance or less importance than some other minor is like this person saying a noun has more importance or less importance than an adverb. It's totally ridiculous, and it actually reveals to me how much you really know about the deeper meaning of any of it. So of course a harmonic minor scale is important, because when you hear it and it's the thing that makes the musical moment, you use it. You don't not use it because it's not used. Who's the one determining what's used and not used? Who?
You are.
Stravinsky used it. Good enough for him is good enough for me. Bird used it. It's good enough. Bach used it. I'm okay with it. So that's just ridiculous. Another thing sometimes it bothers me. A lot of the younger people will think every time you play a major chord, it must have a flatted 5 or a raised 11. It just must.
Yes.
You never do it. And if you're going to play a C major, it's got to have it, as if God wrote it in the universe. That again is another kind of musical stupidity, because sometimes it's a big fat major 7th or major 6th chord makes the melodic moment in that moment in time. That's what you use. And if a raised 11 makes the musical moment you want, you use that. There's not such thing as this has more value, less value. You use whatever makes the moment work. So that I don't believe in boxing yourself in musically, harmonically, rhythmically, or any other way. If you're free, you're free. And you don't need a concept to make you free. So somebody's free, to me, is able to play Happy Birthday and play it and never run out of improv and ideas, never run out of how to reharmonize it. Never. So the tune means nothing. It's in terms, what are you doing with the improvisation of it? And how creative are you? And then when you approach music that way, there's no such thing as it's just good and it's bad, because you're totally free. So that's the way I think of music. I think of it as let's say the difference between modal playing and 2-5-1. I think a player is supposed to know how to do both. One is supposed to be able to play modally and play it, and one is supposed to be able to play changes and play them, not licks, a bunch of bebop licks and worked out stuff, but ongoing stream of consciousness, using major and minor thirds, playing 2-5-1s or 5-1s, whatever you want to call them, and never running out of a melodic idea and rhythmic ideas. You're supposed to be able to play for days on any tune and don't repeat. And if you can't, that's because that you are limited creatively. And so it's the same thing with modal playing. To me, the greatest modal players of all were the people who played 2-5-1s better than everybody else. I mean, Train really could play 2-5-1s. He really could. I mean, really, you name somebody that did that better, actually? So guess what? When it comes to modal playing, he's doing that better too. So when I listen to young players, to me, I mean, the players who actually play the more creatively and more compellingly modally are the ones who play the changes the best too. To me, so you're supposed to be at home with both of them. There are 12 notes, at least in Western music, and you're supposed to know how to get to the notes any kind of way possible, and with any kind of rhythm possible, and any sequence possible. That, to me, is what the creation is about. And if you're limited, then that's you. because the mathematics of the music is and especially when you add rhythm to it, is pretty damn infinitesimal. You know, by the time you know, there's a lot of if you run out of something to play, it's because you ran out. It's not because the mathematics ran out. You did.
Right.
Yeah,
And having said all that, the boss of it all is the humanity part, the human story that you're using all of this to tell and write about and improvise about and play about.
If I could jump in, yes, I remember when I got the chance to study with you. You asked me to play through Lover, the standard with all those descending 2/5s, right? And of course, I was very young and I was repeating myself and sequencing through all these patterns, right? And then you told me, listen to Charlie Parker play Lover on Birds with Strings, and just listen to how he never repeats himself, right? And he's just endlessly creative over this progression. And then you proceeded to demonstrate that yourself. You played through the song, and just an endless fountain of ideas. So obviously it's a massive question, and it's due to a lifetime of study and practice. But what is your process for cultivating this endless creativity and this spontaneity all the time?
Well, let me say something about the 2/5s, and this, because I do teach a lot, and I come across this just like I came across it with you, with the player trying to negotiate, navigate through a bunch of 2/5s, and something that the older players have learned some kind of way that might have gotten lost, and so the secret of this 2/5 playing is basically this. The 2 doesn't have quite as much importance as the 5. See, so there's the trick. Now the 2 can be there, you know, especially piano players are almost compelled to play a minor 2 to a dominant 5. But a horn player doesn't have to worry about that as much because they're playing across the change. And the same scale that's in a 2 is also the same scale starting on a different note as the dominant 7th. So the minor 2 is the same scale as the dominant 7th. So the young player must learn how to do this, to look at the minor 2 chord and the dominant 7th almost as one guy, and with the emphasis more on the 5. And here's why. Because that's where you're going to. So it's got something to do with forward momentum. That's where you're going to go after the 2. Also, harmonically, it's where all of the altered goodies are. All of the altered notes, the higher partials of the flatted 9, the raised 9, the flatted 13th, the regular 13th, the raised 11, all the things that can be altered or could be altered are going to occur on a dominant, not on a 2. A 2, if you change one note, there's only one note you can change on a 2, and that's the half diminished, the flatted 5. That's it. You change anything else, it's no longer a 2. But a dominant has all of the things that you can change, plus the regular 6, 9, 13, where you don't change anything. And it's going to go to the 1. So the real key is almost 5-1. So when you're playing a tune like Lover, and the way Bird played it, and a lot of people play it, you know, they'll play like a G flat minor 7 to a B7, you know, 2/5 for that second chord. And really what you can do as a horn player is just think more of the dominant 7 and don't worry about the 2 so much, because by the time you blink, the 2 might be over. You see, so there a lot of it is that knowing that the 2 and the 5 are the same, really, especially for horn players. Piano players do have to kind of delineate a little bit, so it's different for them. But for us, it's not. And see, that comes from when you go farther back in music. A lot of the jazz players in the, like the swing players and even earlier, they didn't necessarily play, the horn players. Now, I'm making a distinction because the piano players were different. The horn players kind of played just the dominant seventh. They didn't play minor twos, like a 2 and a 5. They just played a 5 and a 1. And on the 5, they would play like, 6, 9, 13, not a whole lot of altered stuff. I mean, and they could play. I mean, some of those people really played really played good, But they kind of thought 5. So when you take people like Bird, and Bird's era is almost the beginning of the jazz musician being fascinated with 2/5, where guys really started being concerned about playing the changes because Charlie Parker played them so well. See, people have to realize that Bird is a product of the swing cats that are older than him. The guys he listened to wasn't himself. It was people like Lester Young and people 10, 15 years older than him. So that means that the beginning bebop players already knew how to think of that 5 chord. And of course they were younger and maybe more into harmony, and they understood the 2, but they knew that it's the same thing. So when you listen to Bird, for instance, say play I Got Rhythm, on the bridge, sometimes you can tell he's thinking a minor 2 to the 5, but sometimes you can tell what he plays, he's just thinking of the dominant 7 and imposing that even though the piano player is playing a minor 2, and vice versa. Because you can do it vice versa. You see what I mean? And so that's what I hope I tried to show you that on that particular tune. And when you do tunes like Countdown and Giant Steps, that's really all you have is a 5/1. You don't have time for a 2, actually, and the tempo's like this. And you're playing dee da 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 dee dee da, really? And then the 2, by the time the 2 is gone, it's only 2 beats. So to make the melodic connection is really 5/1. You really better negotiate that 5 and that 1, So it's the little things like that. And some young players, unless they've been told that, or unless they've been mentored by somebody that tells them, or if they're smart and brilliant themselves, but that's something that you will find out. So 2/5s are not as mechanical as you think if you know how to deal with them.
Good. Since you mentioned mentors, I know that Barry Harris was a big mentor on you, and I'd love to hear just when you moved to Detroit and how you met Barry Harris. I know he was a neighbor, right? Or he lived up like on your block, and also your relationship with other guys. I got to have the chance to interview Louis Hayes a couple of years ago, and I think he moved to New York City the same year that you moved to New York City. So maybe just how you met Barry Harris and your relationship with Louis Hayes too.
Yeah, well, I met Barry because I lived on the street right around the corner from him, and I started really listening to jazz music at about 13 or 14. Before that, I had a few jazz records, but I wasn't a real jazz fan. And I started playing trumpet at 12. And then at 13, I started playing sax alto. And a young guy in the band, maybe a year older than I, told me about Charlie Parker. And I got a chance to listen to a Bird record on a jukebox. Mm-hmm. And right away I knew that, okay, whoever this guy is, that's it. I need to learn how to really do what this is, and this is what I want to find out about. And then I find out there's a whole genre of musicians, a whole slew of musicians who play this genre of jazz music. The whole bunch of them. There's, Miles, there's Dizzy, there's Bird, there's Stan Getz, there's Clifford Brown, there's Sonny Rollins. There's Chet Baker, there's Hank Mobley. It's a whole bunch of people that played this kind of music. And in those days, we called it progressive jazz, bebop, or modern jazz.
Huh.
So when I find that out, then I find out there's a bar down the street, 2 or 3 blocks down the street from my house, on the same street I live on, that features exclusively this kind of music. So when I find this out, then I start walking down there and standing outside of the club and listening, because I couldn't get in. I'm like 15 years old, 14, 15. And here's who the house band was. Elvin Jones on drums, Barry Harris on piano, Pepper Adams on baritone sax, Thad Jones on trumpet, and sometimes Paul Chambers or somebody like that on bass. This was the house band.
Wow.
At
Yeah.
this club 2 blocks down the street from our house. A bass player named Beans Richardson also was a bass player at that club. Anyway, this was the house band. So when I heard these guys play, I couldn't believe this kind of, I just had never heard people play instruments like that. And that was it for me. And I would just go stand, and also a lot of Lewis Hayes would be standing out there, Roy Brooks, a bunch of Detroit young players who couldn't get in the club would be especially in the summertime, would be standing in front of the club listening to the music. And Elvin Jones would be playing drums, and his back would be to a window. We actually had a signal for Elvin. We would come up, and I would knock on the window, and when he'd hear the knock, he'd turn around and fix the Venetian blinds so that we could see in the club, because he knew there was a bunch of young players out there listening. So every time he would turn around, fix the Venetian blinds, and then he'd continue playing.
So you guys weren't allowed in the club because you were underage?
21 years old, yeah. You had to be 21.
Okay. Another thing I want to ask is, still in that time period, because you're like 14, 15, there's other kids your age. Most of the people that you would go to school with, they wouldn't be checking out bebop, right? So what music would they be into at that time?
They'd be listening to the pop music of the day, just like now. So the pop music of the day were you had rhythm and blues. People would be listening to what we call doo-wop groups. People singing on the corner and just singing, singing songs where you like usually male quartet, 4 or 5 men singing, and
like
those
barbershop
were the
groups.
records. The Drifters, the Orioles, Smokey Robinson. These were the people that most of the kids were listening to. But there were a select few people, especially musicians, and what we would call hipsters back in those days, listening to Charlie Parker and people like that. Only a select few. But they were there, though. They were there. And we were that the jazz fan had a different look, dressed differently, had a different vibe. And the audience that supported that music had a different look and a different vibe, dressed differently than the normal, regular, American, And so we thought of ourselves as being a member of an exclusive club, an esoteric exclusive club that you'd have to be pretty hip to even understand this. And if you did, then you were a member, and that was it. And so we did. There were jazz fans in those days.
I feel like
so I met Barry just from him coming out to get some air in the summertime, and he would see us out there, and he sort of befriended us, and he knew he knew I played, because we actually played in this club one afternoon. We brought our parents, like a matinee, and we actually played a set. And Miles was living in Detroit and working at this particular club for about 2 years. And this club was called the Bluebird, a very famous club during the 50s. And Miles played at that club often. And so Miles was working there during this period. This was before he came back to New York and started his group with Train and Cannonball and all that. So one matinee, we came in and played in the afternoon. Me and a trumpet player named Lonnie Hillier, another little young guy my age that lived on my same street. And we both ended up working with Mingus later in the 60s. And we sat in and we played. I remember the tune we played was Star Eyes. And we played the melody well. But when it came time for the improv, there was a bunch of wrong notes to be played, especially by me. But and Barry, this is when Barry said, "Well, you guys sound pretty good, but you need to know something about harmony and theory. You can't this music here. You got to know about this. And if you want to come over to my house sometimes, I live right around the corner, and then I can maybe show you, get you started on how to learn how to improvise." And that began the relationships with Barry for me.
I feel like what you were describing about jazz being hip, and it was like the people who were understood that you were part of a club, you dressed differently. I still feel that now.
Yeah, it's true. The same is it's the same.
Yeah, but it's even more anachronistic, if you will. Like before, people were into Smokey Robinson, and then there was some bebop heads, but now people are into Taylor Swift, and people are into EDM and raves, and then here is young people still discovering the music and being into that. And I think it's a very beautiful thing. And it was also one of the things that really struck me when I moved to Harlem, because where I'm from, the only people who knew about jazz were the people who played it, right? And so they were the other sax players, they were the other drummers, what have you. But when I moved to Harlem, that was when I first met the people, the real people, the people who they didn't play, but they were part of the culture. And unfortunately, it's a dying breed. But what a beautiful.
Because most of those people you're talking about are probably older people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And
that's true. It's true. I agree. Yes. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No worries. I'm sure you know the type I'm talking about. Should we be focused on how do we cultivate more of those types in a new generation? They probably won't have the same look, they won't have the same vibes, but we want those people, right? And now it seems everybody who's into the music is a player, except for that remaining crew here in Harlem and in other places.
Well, I know what you mean, and that's a very complicated question, and I think that the answers are complicated, but definitely exposure has something to do with it. A lot of, I think that you have a bigger jazz audience if the music was exposed more. But see, it's not really. You don't really hear it on AM radio. You hear it on jazz radio, of course, but it's not part of the American mainstream. Yeah, and I'm just talking about America. It's not really, for whatever reason, it doesn't really. It's not. It's just not America's music. It's considered esoteric, other than alternative or or whatever. But it's not embraced by enough people in this country. Even though it was born in this country, it's just not, and that's just a fact. And so when you start saying, well, what can happen? I don't know what can happen. I know it being exposed more could maybe help some sort of way. It's in all of the schools. I mean, when I was coming up, there was no such thing as a jazz curriculum. Not in high school or junior high school. and barely colleges. It's just colleges, and you learned about music. A jazz curriculum wasn't heard of. Now at least you have that. There are high schools all over the country that have jazz bands. You know, they're playing charts by Bob Brookmeyer or E or whomever. There are big bands that go and participate with Wynton's, Duke Ellington, that thing he does, and and there's a lot of jazz, and of course, there are jazz in colleges. So it's being exposed more in a certain kind of way. But even so, all you have to do is look at the Grammys, and you see what's considered America's music. Mm-hmm. So it's just I don't know what can happen. All we can do is expose it more, keep playing it in the schools, and that kind of thing. And also, as musicians, I think we bear some responsibility to things as well. In our quest to be really wonderful musicians, as instrumentalists, singers, composers, it's always good to be mindful of how what you're doing is sounding to the person that doesn't know what you know. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Now, I don't mean that you necessarily have to dummy down, but it's a way of being mindful, for that to be in your mind when you're playing, when you're writing, is to be mindful of that, because that has a way of informing how you phrase the tunes you write, how you write, and really how you improvise. Now, I'll give you an example of that, and this will make my point. You guys are musicians, so if you walk into a club and there's a band playing All the Things You Are, for instance, and there's a few moments where you don't know what that tune is. You haven't identified it yet. So all you're hearing is, bass players playing what they play, horn players playing blah, 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 drummers doing what they do, piano players doing what they do. And you have no idea of the tune, the form, where they are, what the changes are. You know nothing. Now, sooner or later, you're going to recognize All the Things You Are. Oh, that's All the Things You Are. But there is a moment in time, especially if the tune is not as popular as All the Things You Are, maybe. And you're hearing the standard. And now, remember how music sounds to you, the trained musician, before you recognize the tune and the structure. How does that sound to you? And you must admit, it sounds, you don't know what to make of it. Okay, I don't care what people are doing. There's this moment where that is discombobulated. Now, bear in mind, quite often to the untrained musical ear, this is what music sounds like to them. So there's no reason, there's no mystery why only a few people really like jazz and can hear it and that it resonates with, because there's a complicatedness about it, for sure. So how that song sounded to you is how it sounds quite often to just regular people who don't know about a 2-5-1 or any of that. So this is what I mean by, I've just used my own self as an example. If I'm playing a tune, just say like All the Things You Are, for instance, and I'm improvising on it. Okay, I'm improvising, but when I get to the bridge, I might play 1 bar or 2 bars of the melody of the bridge, just for sonic information for the listener. And it's doing me no harm at all. It's actually making me not just chase chord changes and ramble. It's making me extrapolate and rather recapitulate. And I do that all the time during an improv. I will play statements from the tune, maybe the bridge or at the beginning, and then I won't do anything at all, but I will come back to things. And some kind of way that's informing people the structure and where you are and the melody. This is what I mean by being mindful of it. Just the fact that you know that it's on the improviser to convey information without dumbing down or lessening the artistic quality, to supply sonic information, structural information, melodic information during the course of your improv is not a come downers or an artistic downer. It's making you be more like what great classical composers are. When you listen to great classical composers and listen to a symphonic work from the beginning to the end, you will hear things start out a certain way. They build up. You hear this composer recapitulate several times all through the thing. You hear something in a major key that now all of a sudden that same melodic line is in a minor key. You're hearing it all the time during the performance of this work. As an improviser, I think that we're supposed to be doing that also. We're not supposed to just be chasing chord changes. We're supposed to be making melodic statements here and there. We're supposed to be recapitulating here and there. We're supposed to have a sense of unfolding like a story, a beginning, a middle, an end. And by the time you end of your solo, you're winding down, you've recapitulated enough, and that's what you call a great solo. Now, a great musician once made this statement, and they said, written music should sound improvised, and improvised music should sound written. And what that means is written music, even if it's an hour long, is supposed to always maintain this feeling of spontaneity as if it was just written in that moment. This is the difference between a craftsman and a great composer, because they're able to capture the spontaneity of the moment, even though this tune might have taken a year to write, or this composition. But the feeling of the spontaneity is there, even though it's frozen music written. Improvised music, on the other hand, should sound written. And what that means is, okay, you're improvising, wonderful. But guess what? You're supposed to be in tune. When you make a statement, then it's supposed to be clean as a whistle. It's supposed to be defined. It's supposed to, the clarity is there. It's almost like you wrote this. And when you're solo, while you're playing your solo, it is to have a beginning. You build up to a climax, so the middle is on fire. And then there's a winding down, just like great stories, a great novel, a great symphony. That's exactly what it is. So it's being aware that music is being used to convey humanity and emotionalities, and music is the medium. But the form and structure, and there's a certain organization that's there. And when you write, you have to think that way. But guess what? When you improvise, the greatest improvisers are the ones who think that way also. And that's the difference between a person who can improvise and a person who can improvise and tell a story.
That was beautifully said. And I just have to be very honest. There's only a few people that really captivate me with with explaining music, and to that degree. And there could be a lot of teachers that discuss these ideas, but very few people have articulated it that well in my eyes. So that was really nice to hear. So I want to continue with that idea that you're going on with telling a story. So when you're improvising, you're talking a lot about technical ideas. Before you were mentioning taking like the same idea and maybe putting it in different modes. Am I correct? Right, like taking the motif and then altering it, like that, and that's a pretty common technique in classical composition as well. So that's technical side of things. Story-wise, though, when you say create a story, tell a story, when you're improvising, are you thinking in your head of trying to tell a certain story in your mind?
Well, let me say this. Ideally, if you're improvising on something, you should really know it. Okay, so let's assume the player really knows the song. That means knows the melody really well, knows the harmony, and knows the structure. It's a given. So it's by memory, not looking at chord changes and looking at the melody and reading and improvising. This is so only when you memorize and commit a particular composition and that you're improvising on. When you've committed to memory, then all of this other kind of mentation, this is when this can work. It's hard for all of this nuance mental nuance that we're talking about to work if you actually got to look at the tune as you can try to play something meaningful while now it's an F minor, now it's D7. You can do it, and there are musicians who can do it. But you play better when you know the material, flat out. So having said that, then I think that it's like the song itself, whatever the song, if you wrote it or you played it or somebody else wrote it, American Songbook, it doesn't make any difference. I think as an improviser, you're supposed to have an understanding of what is this song about? What is the basic emotionality of the song? What is the tune? What is the melody sort of gives you that idea, and the chord structure. We were talking earlier about certain chords resonate or have a different sadness or happy, okay, so what is this tune? I think it's a good idea to have that. That's almost part of your way of improvising. It's almost like it's an automatic. That that's so much a part of what you're supposed to be doing. It's not even on a conscious level anymore. But until it is, then you make it on a conscious level, and then you play the emotion of the tune. And if you know the tune well, and you're at a certain level as a player, you're not even thinking about chords and is this an A minor or is this a D7? You're thinking about the emotionality is going to give me the best note in a D7. Because I got a bunch of notes to choose from. But which one is the best for the moment, or the best 3 or 4 of the moment? And then that's when the difference between a player that's playing, letting the emotionality govern the improv, as opposed to letting the chord structure govern the improv. If you know the tune well enough, you don't even think about the chord structure. You just think about the emotionality that you want to play, that you want to express. And see, yet again, that's the difference between craft and art. The craft is just making you understand the physicalities and the language and the grammar of music. But what to use when and where is the art of it. and how to think about it, and what is your feelings. And see, therein lies the difference between being able to tell a story as opposed to just chasing chord changes. And there's a difference. Both will get you there. Both will make you play the changes. But one is making you choose notes differently. And so it sounds complicated, I guess, but in a way it is so simple that it's elusive. Yeah, so it's almost to remember what your focus should be on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of people don't really even think that way. There's so many different ways to play music and so many different emotions. Some people never think about, they're not even thinking emotionally at all. They're thinking mechanically maybe or something. Okay, that'll get you there. You can certainly play music that way. But I think an artist should be understand all of the emotions that a human being can feel, and then to be able to use their particular art, whatever it is, singing, playing, writing, architect, I don't care, whatever it is, the medium changes, but the intent is to express the human condition. And what is that? Joy, sorrow, and all the gradation and everything in between. As people, to me, that's what. And an artist is supposed to be able to, now in order for you to do that, you got to be able to feel all of that. If you're playing a song about great sorrow, you actually got to know what sorrow feels like, and most of us do. Then you got to know how to put that there. You got to know how to choose the notes, how to bend the note, how to phrase the note, the choices of the note that express that. If it's great joy, now this is like, oh, whoa, oh, this is wonderful. You got to know how to choose the notes to express that. You can't be just, oh, it's F minor to D7, and then I'm playing the third, and then I'm raising the 9. I mean, you can think that, and that'll get you there. But what is that? So you're using a flatted 9 and a raised 9 to express the emotion. The emotion is the main event, not the chord. The emotion is choosing whether I should raise that 9 or flat that 9, or just making an open 6, 9, 13.
Yeah.
Your feeling is that, because there's a moment when the flatted 9 is the one to do. So it's like, what do you want? What are you doing? So this is usually comes with players that are like older and more mature in a way. And there are some geniuses that know this at 24, But a lot of us have to live life a little bit and to experience things before we can actually put that into music. And I will say this, that if we're playing music as a livelihood, and so we're playing for people, and they're the ones paying to see us, this is a good thing to remember. You can't make one human being feel anything that you're not feeling yourself while you're playing. So if you're playing great sadness, you're not going to be able to make that person, that human being over there sitting down listening, feel the sadness unless you are at that moment that you're improvising feeling that sadness yourself. Or if you're feeling great ecstasy and joy, if you're not feeling that emotion yourself as a player while you're improvising, you're not going to make that person sitting down in the chair feel any of that. So this is what I mean. If you have to be true to you. You're playing music. Music is a metaphor, an analogous of emotions. The main event is us. And music is being used as a tool to convey the inner world of us to the outer world.
If I could jump in here, it's so great to hear you say these things, because this is an opinion I've always held of your music is, we're playing off the same vocabulary. Everybody, you've studied Bird, I've studied Bird, and we're playing the same chord progressions, the same songs. But when I listen to one of your recordings, I'm affected, and when I listen to perhaps some of my own playing or other young players trying to get our things together, like I said, we're playing the same vocabulary, but it's different. It's different. When I listen to you, when I listen to Lee Konitz, when I listen to Bird, it's like that's the difference, right? And
yeah, but I must say, Austin, some of that is like age and experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
That will come. That will come with life. Living life has something to do with that. And also, this is important too. And Bird said this a long time, and that's why he was such an interesting figure. Because people like Sheila Jordan and people who are Bird's age, who were around when Bird was around, she told me that Bird, there was a place in Midtown that people like Gil Evans, Sheila Jordan, Miles, and Bird, Jerry Mulligan, they would all hang out at Gil Evans's house, an apartment in Midtown in the 50s. This would be a hang for of these young guys at that point. And they would, sit around and talk about philosophy and talk about different things, and certainly music. And she said Bird was different than all of them. And he said something to all of us. And he said, you should learn something other than music. You should go to the museum and look at painting and great art and understand that. You should read some great classic books by people who really know how to write. And so that you will learn how all art is interconnected. And when you learn that, then when you play, you have something to play about, and you have more dimension as an improviser. This man knew that in his 20s, and he was saying it to people. So there's no mystery why a guy like Charlie Parker played like he did, because he was smart, not just gifted, but left brain smart and right brain gifted.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, and that's one of the things I learned from Barry, going over to his house as a young man, because sometimes musicians would come over to Barry's house, people like Pepper Adams and other people, and they would talk, and sometimes it would not be about music at all. It would be about poetry. It would be about literature. It would be about philosophy. Barry Harris could do the New York Times puzzle in about 20 minutes. These people were well read. They could talk about many different things. Science, actually. They tell me that Bird knew about quantum mechanics. Harold Land, great tenor player, said he'd go backstage. Everybody else is talking and hanging, and Bird is in the corner reading a book about quantum mechanics, Max Planck or something. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
So I learned all this from Barry and listened to older musicians. And in Detroit, in those days, to be considered hip meant that you not only knew about Charlie Parker, but you knew about Nietzsche, you knew about Schopenhauer, you knew about Immanuel Kant, you knew about Spinoza, you knew of some of the great writers, you knew a lot about, you could talk about many different things. You knew about science, certain stuff about it. And you could talk about more than one thing. And I realized that the great players really were basically great thinkers. They were bigger than life. They were not just musicians. They were people who had a world view about things that happened to play music.
Can I can I just jump in here and
Yes.
another thing that you when I watched the interview you did with Ed Jaffe is you spoke about how you brought your report card to Barry Harris and he said like, let me see it, and you said that it was all C's, and then he was saying like, this music is played by people that are they're the top, they would get A's and B's.
Yeah.
And then you improved your work because of that. But I really loved that whole thing because I feel like a big mentality that people have is they're not smart enough to be the A student. And it applies not just to grades, but in other aspects of life too. It's like a mental block. So if someone has that mental block, they have low expectations for themselves, and then all of a sudden a mentor you looked up to told you that you could do better than this, and then you did better than that, and like that was such a nice story to hear, that it's not just to do with intelligence at all, but it has so much more to do with the expectations you have for yourself.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And basically what it all means, it ends up being focus, consistency, and energy toward scholarship. And when I say scholarship, it means the willingness to investigate whatever it is you're doing with a mental spotlight of intense investigation and being consistent with it for whatever it is you're doing. If it happens to be a math problem, if it happens to be a story that you got to read and then write your take on the story, it's whatever you're doing for the moment. Be willing to give 110% of whatever that's necessary to nail it, and to get used to doing that, because people like Charlie Parker did that, and that's why they were so great. And then when I heard that interview that Bird had with Paul Desmond, maybe you've heard it. So, have you ever heard the interview? Paul Desmond
is beautiful.
Interviewing Charlie Parker at a radio station. So for a day, Paul Desmond is the disc jockey, and he has different guests. This particular day, Charlie Parker was Paul Desmond's guest. Have you ever heard that? It's on tape. It's an interview.
Yes, it's been very, very important to me, and he talks about listening to Stravinsky and all sorts of cool stuff.
All sorts of things. But one thing he did say, when Paul asked him, "Where did you get this great technique?" And Bird said, "Well, it wasn't done with mirrors." And he said, "I used to practice 11 to 15 hours a day, every day, for about 3 years. And that was it." Now, I found that out much later, but this is what Barry is talking about. When you think about 11 to 15 hours a day, do you know what level of scholarship that is, to dedicate that much time to anything for 3 years, that consistently like that? That's some serious study. So this technique that Bird had, I mean, it's what they say, genius is 90% work. That proves it. This technique wasn't done with mirrors and, I'm just gifted and I got it. This guy worked 11 to 15. How many people practice 11 to 15 hours a day for 3 years? How many? Only virtuosos. And that's why he's a virtuoso. But this is what Barry meant was, your heroes are people like Charlie Parker. These people were willing to do the work.
Yeah.
And by the way, they are not just big dummies who play music. These people can sit down and talk about a variety of things with some depth. And if you want to learn how to play like that, you're going to have to tighten up your game. And him saying that to me was, unfortunately, had more resonance than my mom or my parents saying that to me. Because here's a man I respected, and he's doing something I truly respect. So I really said, oh, really? And then I started looking at all of that in a different way. I started looking at it like, oh, well, Bird was smart, and he tried hard, and he worked hard. I'm gonna have to do that. And then I just changed the trajectory of my whole life. I started reading books. This is when I got into the great philosophers and the great classic books. And I started reading about Max Planck and quantum mechanics and all of that kind of stuff. And to this day, I know about Stephen Hawking. I know about the superstring theory. I understand what quarks are. I have an understanding of time and space and the space being curved and stuff, I mean, I have some understanding of it, but that's all based on me being tutored by a very smart man. And so it broadened my whole mental thing. It broadened everything. So I thought of music differently, and I still do.
I think that type of breadth of knowledge and experience, it's what allows you to be, like, for example, let's take for example your current jazz and dance project. I feel like there's a lot of cats who all they think about is swing, and all they do is swing, and they would never think to organize or become the resident composer for the San Diego Ballet, right? Because that's just not in the cards. All they do is play, and you have the capacity to branch out into other fields and reach new people. And I think Bert did that. Dizzy Gillespie definitely did that. Cannonball Adderley did that. Miles Davis, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So going back to this topic of reaching new audiences with jazz, and we were talking about how not mainstream it is, but then we got into this whole conversation of like, how do we change ourselves musically to really impact people with depth, even if they're not familiar with what we're playing. But I also like to add that, even since your time, jazz has not been mainstream, and I almost feel like that's a lost cause. Like, jazz will always be niche, and that's just the thing it is. But we can. That's the same thing is true for tons of disciplines. Like even ballet is not mainstream, but they've found an audience that loves it, and they found a business model that supports the artist. Always could be better, but that exists. Or like sculpting or buying fine art. It's like all these are niche things, and jazz can exist in that space and still thrive. And that's why I really love what you did with the San Diego Ballet. It's like you can reach new audiences, and it doesn't have to be number one on Billboard. It's like you went to those people and shared your music. So do you think this would be a good time to show people a little snippet from that concert?
Yes, of course, yes, yeah. Austin, you can add it later if you want to. You can add it on later if you want.
Oh, add it on later.
If you want,
Okay, yeah, we can certainly edit it in. Yeah, that's a beautiful tune, and it really depicts it well. Heart's desire and unrequited love, as we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, it's alright. So, I'd love to talk about your daughter Camille getting into ballet, because as we spoke earlier, how you were just attracted to jazz, and how it back then it was a niche genre, and it was a select group of people that were into it, and now it's the same, and I think it's the same as we were talking a little bit earlier about with ballet as well. It's a pretty niche genre, and although it isn't, I'm trying to think of other popular dance, but
it isn't hip hop or breakdance.
Yeah, as long as even though it's not hip hop or breakdance, it embodies the human spirit and emotion, and in all its essence. So what made your daughter attracted to ballet, and what do you make of ballet when she was first interested in it?
Well, she got interested really early on, 3-4 years old. So we used to take her to a little ballet school in San Diego here, and she just loved it right off. She just loved it, and she always loved it. She started very early on, and she never lost her love. That was, all through, up until now, that she's still dancing. That's it. So for me, of course, I started learning more about it when she got interested in it, and we're taking her to performances. All in, there's at least 3 ballet companies here in San Diego. So we would take her to the performances and let her see it, and in doing so, then besides really looking and paying attention to the dancers and understanding the artistry involved, there's great music being played at the same time, because they're doing, Stravinsky's Firebird and Petrushka. They're doing these great, Bartok. All this great music is being played. Now, Camille is a very musical young lady. She was musical as a child. She played piano for a while, and then she played harp. So she's got a musical soul, and she's blessed with good ears, and she really understands the emotionality that music brings about, and how it's related to movement. She has an innate sense of that, and she's very much informed by the music that gives her all of the cues subconsciously that make her know how to just all the nuance of movement, and because she really internalizes the musical the music aspect of it. And then of course, there's been some really beautiful ballet music written by great composers. So I'm looking at dance, which is great, and I'm listening to this great music. So I'm learning about, I'm listening to the oboe parts, and maybe the violins here and there, along with looking at my daughter dance. I'm doing a bunch of things at once. And so I've learned a lot. And also, I must say that my involvement with Mingus, I worked with Mingus for 12 years. Mingus was quite prolific as a writer, and he wrote, Mingus wrote poetry. He wrote for dance. He was pretty eclectic, and he had a symphonic way of thinking about things. He was very much knowledgeable about Western classical music, the modern people like Stravinsky, Hindemith, Prokofiev. He knew a lot, as well as the jazz jazz artists like Duke Ellington and Jimmy Blanton and people like that. So he was a well-rounded musician, but he definitely wrote thematically. He wrote episodically. He wrote poetry. He was very political. He wrote music, protest music. He, so, and some of that I definitely learned by way of osmosis by Mingus, especially Mingus's ballad writing, which I've always thought was interesting, harmonically interesting and melodically interesting and haunting. He had a combination of being haunting and mysterious at the same time, and melodic, which is some interesting combinations. So I did get a sense of how to thematically put things together, just from listening to music, listening to Mingus, and then me being involved with the ballet, and then being asked to be the resident composer, and then actually writing for people dancing. That's when I started. I really kind of felt comfortable doing that after doing the first suite. I was pretty nervous about it because I didn't know if the choreographer would like what I wrote, or if I could do it, meaningfully. I didn't know, and I didn't have a formula, of how to do this. And then I think I just kind of got the right formula for me. And so the other two suites were easier to write. But I did learn how to be very accurate and organized so that you give the dancers the right cues, because they're not improvising, but how to improvise as well. So straddle the fence of organized music with a good sprinkling of improvisation, and how to do it when, and how to be able to cue the dancers, and just to organize that in a certain way so it's structured and organized. I did kind of learn how to do that, and that really kind of is the art of writing jazz music to music that's being performed and executed the same way every time. There's a way that you have to learn how to use improvisation along with organized structure of things.
Yeah, I'd love to know the process of rehearsing and you collaborating with the director of the ballet, and how much interaction there was with like whether you write the piece of music and then he writes the choreography for it, or
exactly.
Is that pretty much how it went down?
That's how it went. And he also made me feel relaxed. He said, "Don't worry about it. I can choreograph to anything. You just write. I will take care of the dancing." And so I said, "Oh, okay. But I'm going to take him at his word." So I would write the music, but I'm still bearing in mind the organizational things that's involved to make this doable for the dancers. So I'm mindful of all that, but then I just write, I just create, and I kind of have a storyline in my own head, even though that the ballet Sweet Synergy was not episodic. It's no real storyline, it's just a conglomeration of compositions. But I still would have an idea of the unfolding of the emotionality and how to sequence this emotion and which should follow, and that kind of thing. So I kept that in mind, and I tried to represent different tempos and different emotions. So I did have that in mind, and I just wrote, and then we would record it. I would rehearse it with the band, record it, burn a disc with the music, and then give it to the choreographer. And then he would rehearse the dancers
Huh.
for a while, and then we would have a rehearsal with the live music, because we'd be on the stage live, and we would rehearse a few times, in a studio, and then put on a performance. And that's how it was done.
I love how you related this type of work that you're doing now back to the teachings and your time with Mingus. Like, that's a connection I would have made, but it makes so much sense at the same time. Well, first I'd like to say that the new album, Jazz Dance Suites, is really great. It came out
Thank you.
August of last year, correct? Was it?
I think so. Lynn, is that right? September.
September.
And, September.
And the link to purchase that and check that out is in the description below. But I'd really love to hear just more about Mingus. Like, to me, he's such a, having obviously never met the guy, he seems like such there's like a cloud surrounding this idea of Mingus, like he had a temper, he was part of bebop and monk and bird, but he was also like all of that, and as you said, very informed politically, but also like kind of had kind of crazy tendencies. Can you kind of illuminate what Mingus is and was to you?
Well, Mingus was that maybe we should do another. We'll set up another thing, because that's a long story.
Happy to.
Yeah, that's a long story. I mean, that's 12 years of working with Mingus, and that's almost a whole show itself. But I will say that I will say a couple things about Mingus. He was confrontational, but he was a very smart, very intelligent, and very sensitive, and was a real artist. He was that, and he did have a sense of ethics and a tenderness about him, even though he was confrontational. But we'll talk about that at another story time.
Beautiful. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
So you have this music, and it's quite a relief, I'd imagine, that you don't have to worry about the choreography for it. So the band that you chose to record the album, it looked like it was a little different from the band you were playing with in the ballet, right?
Yeah, it was, because I used in New York, because we went to New York and we played at a club at the Jazz Standard. This is, so I used that gig to rehearse the music with the New York musician. So yeah, Yotam Silverstein, the guitars. Lorraine Teresa is the singer on there. Some of those words are Hebrew. And she's the singer, and also, Jeb Patton, wonderful pianist, Billy Drummond, drums, David Wong, bass, and Terrell Stafford on trumpet, and Randy Porter, on piano as well. So that was those are great musicians that were able to digest and learn that music quickly. Randy Porter knew the music already because he was the piano player that's on the visuals, on the dance.
Oh, wow.
On the performances in San Diego.
Yeah.
So he also helped engineer the date. It was done at the Van Gelder Studios. And I think they got a great sound. And Randy helped with that, as well as played on one of the songs, two songs actually. And so that that's a labor of love. It represents my involvement with the ballet company and Camille dancing, and my wife Lynn is a great pianist. She helped a lot with all of this. In fact, some of her ideas are used in some of the compositions. We played a composition called "The Wedding Song," and you will hear it's kind of a happy song. And then, as the story goes, the wedding was something that she was wishing for, but it ended up he ended up, I think, marrying someone else or whatever. So there's a song called "Hear My Plea," which is basically wedding song in a minor key. And that was my wife's idea.
Wow, yeah, you mentioned that in the liner notes,
Yep.
to the record, and I kept listening to those two, and I love when I hear stuff like that. You take the same idea, and then I was like, wow, like it's really cool, and it works it's so appropriate too.
Yeah.
Because you could still have the sentiment of a wedding in your mind, but then it's like kind of colored with this negative light too. But I'm getting a little bit too analytical with that. But
that was exactly because it was a wedding that didn't happen.
yeah. So all of a sudden it becomes like a tainted memory.
Yeah, a memory. Yeah, instead of happy, it's like, oh, it didn't happen. It's not me. I wish it were, and her remembering it, and the memory of that. It's a sad thing because she's got to remember that she doesn't have her man.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, oh yeah, I just wanted to say, so I had the opportunity of getting to help do the videography at Rudy Van Gelder's a few months ago for a group, and that was my first time in the studio, and I love the studio. It's a huge room.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Beautiful room. Yeah. So what was I think I saw in the video that you guys made, the group that I was recording. I was videotaping for the group I was doing that for. The way they assembled was all in a circle, and Don Sickler was there, and he actually said that it was the same layout because it was the same instrumentation that Herbie Hancock's group assembled in. I'm forgetting the name of the record. But it was with Herbie Hancock and Donald Byrd. It was that group, and it was a similar. I think it was just a quintet instrumentation. But what they did is they all assembled in a circle in the center of the room. But I noticed that on that video that the Billy Drummond, he was in the drum booth, and you guys were a little more spread out, right? So how did that come to be, and what was the recording process like at Rudy's?
Well, that's the way that when you talk about Herbie Hancock and those records in those days, back in those days, the whole recording, everybody's in the same room. You can't do that now because so somebody is going to be in a booth or something. So that's kind of, unfortunately, that's kind of the way it is, that people are separated, and you just have to find a way to deal with it because that's the way usually it's done. And but yet and still, you had the expertise of Maureen, who was a protege, an apprentice, served her apprenticeship with Rudy, and so she's got the mic technique down and the equipment and how to balance things, and plus the room itself is gorgeous.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, Yotam was in a different room. Billy Drummond was in a different room.
But it was all open.
Yeah, yeah, but we weren't in one room like Herbie Hancock was. Was it Herbie Hancock's drummer in the same room as them?
Yeah, that's what I believe. I believe it was Billy Higgins on that record. I'm trying to remember the record. I'd like to see if you knew the record, but.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so listen, I'm going to have to run. I hope you guys got enough footage and things.
Oh, absolutely. It was really, truly a pleasure to get to talk to you and pick your brain about all these things. And
thank you.
It really enlightened me, as I said before, just the way that you go about explaining certain concepts of the importance of really understanding chords and the emotions that they convey is that I've only experienced a few people that talk that articulately about about that subject. So that it was really a pleasure to hear from you about that, and also your life and your mentors. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. And if you need, any more, you can call or whatever. And I hope you get some good things. Let me know of some feedback you get. You can email me.
Will do. We'll definitely stay in touch.
Okay. All right. Okay. Next time.
Next time. Thank you so much, Mr. McPherson. What a
Thank
pleasure.
you.